So what's been a real gift of Frasier was I got to experience some relationships I didn't have in my own life. I got to live them through my imagination.
Kelsey Grammer, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
How are you?
Hey, Tom.
Congratulations on this thing, man.
Thank you.
It's beautiful to see
Thank you
a
very
second
much.
season for it.
Thanks.
Let's go back to the idea of the reboot in the first place.
Right.
What convinced you that this was worth doing?
Okay, so Tom Russo works in my company. He's like the chief executive of it, basically. And we were talking after Roseanne came back on.
Oh, yeah.
And thought, she's still funny. It's still relevant. Maybe we should think about a Frasier. And so we set up a little appointment with the guys over at CBS and walked in and said, here we go. We would like to reboot Frasier. And of course, the original reaction was like, ooh, that's going to be a tough nut to crack, because there's so many people involved, so many legacy producers, all that. And we got Charles Burroughs Charles, we got Angel Casey Lee. There's a whole bunch of people that had their before you even get to actually where you're going to actually make a show.
Yeah.
So, but that daunting as it was, didn't really turn us aside from it. We said, okay, let's stick a pin in it. You see what you think you can do. And of course, the networks these days are not very committal to anything until you actually walk in and say, this is what we're going to be doing. So we hatched a plan, and they had a whole thing laid out for what we were going to do. The legacy cast was going to come back, and we were going to add some new people. And because I always wanted it to be fresh, that had to be a new series of responsibilities. We were going to add a best friend anyway. Because my wife pointed out years ago, she said, Frasier never had a friend.
Yeah.
Never really, he had his brother.
Yeah.
Which was, a wonderful relationship, sort of adversarial in a strange way.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
And, but a real genuine friend really started to appeal to me. And at the same time, I ended up doing Man of La Mancha in London and met Nicholas Lyndhurst, who is around the world a known commodity, even a national treasure in terms of the UK, but in America, it was like, who is he? So he and I pretty much just fell in love. And 5 years ago, I looked at him and said, would you be interested in being on the new Frasier if we can get it done? He said, boy, would I. He said, that's my dream. So we share the same dream. He's a magnificent guy and a wonderful friend. And he's just great in the play. He's great in it, great in the show. I call it the play in my head. It's like he just knows how to work an audience and work a joke and be present and trenchant and part of something and significant, relevant. It's a new word for me. I like so much. He's just wonderful.
I can see how much it means to you. I can see how much this show means to you. And it was really fun to watch the first season. And then when I started watching the new one to get ready for this, I was really touched by the return to Seattle.
Thanks.
So of course the original show was set in Seattle. Really changed the architecture of Seattle. Changed the way that Seattle was thought about. In the
even where it was geographically.
Yeah.
That can't be there.
Because people wanted. I heard that people wanted the Frasier apartment view, and it doesn't exist. So for this season, you had to go back. into a set, but you had to go back. You got to go back into that radio studio. The radio studio you had spent your life in.
Yeah, it got chopped up somewhere.
How was that for you?
It was fine for me. What was funny was people who have been associated with the previous iteration of the show walked in that day. We were doing camera blocking day. The set was finally built. They built it over the weekend and put it in. And I was directing that episode, so I was like, looking at it, remembering, oh yeah, this angle, that works there. And so some people walked in, several of them, and said, oh my God.
You didn't have any of that?
It's just... I was like, it's a set. Come on.
I thought you would have been sitting in the chair where you did the,
Until I sat down in the chair.
Okay.
When we were actually shooting it.
Yeah.
When the audience was there, when you got that sense of the elevated sense of what it is to perform the moment, always informs me of the real emotion of it. So the honesty of it came out then. Until then it was just a set. And then suddenly it was being back in time and back in a place that meant a lot to me. It was a real labor of love, and it all sort of spun into my head when I sat down and said, hello, Seattle, Dr. Frasier Crane. I'm listening.
I bet.
Yeah.
I bet it was emotional. I mean, it had to have been an emotional moment. It's been funny, over the past couple of months, before I knew I was talking to you. I don't know if they told you, I'm a big fan of the show. I've watched the full series a bunch of times, yeah. And my wife and I, we went back and watched Cheers. Mm-hmm. We watched it's on streaming on Paramount. We watched the whole thing. And I didn't know how late in the game Frasier came in. The show was established. The show was a hit. Can you take me back a little bit? When you're walking on that set for the first time, it's not something new. It's not, is this going to work? I'm a new character in a big hit show.
I was meant to break them up.
Yeah.
Sam and Diane needed a foil.
Yeah.
And so it became Frasier Crane after she had her little time in a home for a while.
Yeah, yeah.
And I did love it. We shot that first episode we shot where he abrupts her in a croquet attack on an octogenarian like combatant.
Yeah.
And she's about to smack her over the head.
Yeah.
And I grab her and we fall in love, supposedly.
Yeah.
The thing that was really important to me and I thought made the character exist, and I think is why he exists to this day, is he was absolutely in love with her. She was the first woman he ever completely fell in love with. And he was emotional and raw and vulnerable and loved her with his whole heart. And of course she broke him and his whole heart. And so, but that made him lovable.
How did it feel for you, Kelsey, on the set, like walking into this? I mean,
well, there were some difficult days because some of the guys were really happy I was there. Some of the characters maybe not so happy. But
because you were coming in, they had a team.
Yeah,
they had a
something
group
kind of established that was working that they liked, and so there was a little bit of an issue there. But you know what? Nick Colasanto, who played Coach, absolutely fantastic. Mm-hmm. Just after the first reading, he walked up and said, "Hey, you're good.
Yeah,
you're good."
Yeah.
He said, "Don't ever forget, you were born with one set of fingerprints."
What does that mean?
Exactly. Took me a while to figure it out.
Yeah.
He said, "They will try to mess you up in that town. They will take away your identity. They will tell you who you are. You just have to remember you were born with one set of fingerprints. You tell them who you are.
You know who you are. You are someone."
That's it.
Oh, that's a beautiful.
And it was great. And I got it and thought, yeah. And pretty much, you know what? That's how I've lived my life there ever since.
Because you were only supposed to be there for a few episodes, and then
off I go.
And then you become a
thing of the past.
And then you become a series regular. You become.
Yeah, but that's what happened instead. Yeah.
I mean, that must have been meaningful.
They had some fun. But Glenn Charles once said to me, he said, we actually been trying to write lines for you that you can't make funny, and we've been taking bets on you, and if he gets a laugh out of this, I'd like to lose $20. So apparently I did that enough for them to finally say, "Oh, forget it. We're just going to hire him."
Last question on Cheers is, this is something I was thinking about a lot coming into this, so I went back and I watched the last episode. I watched the coverage of the last episode.
Right.
I watched the Jay Leno Tonight Show.
Oh, yeah, right.
Where he
right.
goes to the bar. You're all in the bar actually celebrating.
Right,
yeah. Having a good night. And I thought about you knowing what I know now, that to everyone else, they were celebrating the end of this big national moment. I mean, for people who are listening to this, there was no bigger, maybe other than MASH.
Pretty huge, yeah.
Yeah, there was no bigger finale than the Cheers finale. But in the back of your mind, I think we looked at it today, it's 4 months from the end of Cheers to the beginning of Frasier.
Yeah, no, we were in pre-production, pretty much.
Were you able to celebrate? Were you able to have an exhale at the end of Cheers? Or were you just going, I got to do this, I got to do another show?
Oh, yeah, no. I mean, Frasier was going to a new world. I mean, we sort of already established that, so I was quite comfortable knowing that it was a spin-off, but it wasn't, it was not going to be like the old show. So we knew we were going to a new frontier.
Yeah.
Let's call it. That was our knowledge. I'd interviewed a couple of writing teams, had landed on Angel Casey Lee, Grub Street, who had done the one about the airport in Nantucket.
Wings.
In Wings, yeah.
Yeah.
They were right on the precipice of becoming great showrunners.
Yeah.
I mean, Wings was a pretty good show.
Yeah.
But the next show was their show. That was the one that really kicked in for them, and it was Frasier.
Did you know it was going to work? Did you know? I mean, spin-offs don't work.
Well, yeah, but the idea was we weren't going to do a spin-off.
But like shows that are based on other shows don't work.
I know.
You knew? Did you know that this is?
I thought it was pretty good, pretty reliably good. I mean, of course, I read the first script. Once we decided we were going to do Frasier, at first we weren't going to do Frasier. But then once we settled on Frasier, we changed his circumstances a little bit. It was good. Peter Casey made a very, very impassioned argument for the idea that we were living in a time when our parents were going to actually start living with us again.
Yeah.
As a sort of a generational event that was taking place in our country. And we thought that makes sense. Get his dad here. And John Mahoney, it's extraordinary. The very last episode of Cheers was shot to pick up. There was one scene that needed to be picked up because Ronnie Graham had left the set of playing this character named Cy Flembeck. Mm-hmm. So they hired John Mahoney to replace him, basically. And John and I are sitting there talking, and I thought, boy, this guy's great. I like his work. I like his personality. And so when we had the script, I said, let's call John Mahoney. And they all agreed. I mean, he was already on the radar, I guess. But I gave him a call and said, we're going to send you this script, John. I'd like you to play my dad. It's great.
He meant a lot to you.
Yeah. He was wonderful. Well, I didn't really have a dad. So what's been a real gift of Frasier was I got to experience some relationships I didn't have in my own life. I got to live them through my imagination and my creative force, I guess. And John was as close to me as any person I've ever known, and I really loved him.
Kelsey, I would never ever deign to get you to talk about the tragic circumstances of your young life. However, I'd love to hear a little bit more about how, I've heard you say that before, that the Frasier cast became the family that you didn't
Right, I didn't have a chance to grow up.
Can you talk to me a little bit
more
about that?
I didn't have a brother.
Mm-hmm.
I had a couple of half-brothers. Mm-hmm. I did have a sister, of course, and I've just written a book about her, which I think is going to be published probably just before Easter this year. But it's almost 50 years since she died.
Oh, my Lord.
Yeah, but it was finally time to write the story, to tell it, and it's been an amazing experience for me.
Why was now the time, if you don't mind me asking?
It just came up. It just started to happen. I mean, honestly, it came from I used to produce a show called Medium.
Yeah.
So I've stayed in touch with a lot of people who are on the sort of like on that spectrum.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and one of them is a gal named Esther that does work. But she lives in England, but she's I think Brazilian, and we were doing a session once, and she just said, "Your sister's here." She says, "Tell her story."
Your sister's here, like
Yeah.
like she's
So
in
they
the
do
room.
this all the time.
Yeah.
This is the world I live in.
Okay. Yeah.
But tell her a story. I thought, well, okay, maybe that is a good idea, and I think it was meant to be a freeing thing, to free me from. I still carried so much of it, and a sense of responsibility about it, that I started writing. I thought, well, I'll write a bit. After about 10 pages, I thought, this is a book. This is a book I should write. This is a book I should write about Karen, but also about my life and about what it's like to deal with a sort of overwhelming, simple, enormous grief.
Yeah.
An ancient grief made fresh. I think that's one line I wrote in the book. And then I realized that people reading about it would probably get some help from it. And so it's meant to help, and I think it will. So
It's a funny thing. I'm not going to go into the specifics of my life, and it's nowhere similar, but in nowhere near as tragic. But I experienced a deep grief early in my life, like a family member and all that stuff. And I have spent a lot of time wondering what it did to me. You know what I mean?
Yeah, interesting.
Like what are the decisions that I made?
And many things I probably would not have let go until now.
God love you.
Which is interesting.
I'm glad you got that, man.
That's good. Thanks.
Yeah, that's
Thank
great.
you.
And I'm glad the cast was able to give you that too.
Yeah.
You know?
It was wonderful. Yeah. To have a brother was a great thing.
Yeah.
You know, even as tortured as that relationship was.
Yeah.
But the father knowledge and the knowledge of to love a father, the way I ended up having a chance to play. That was wonderful.
I mean, that's beauty. Most people, it's just a role, man. Like, you play a role, you go home, you go to bed. It sounds like you and John had a real...
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Well, I think that was real for all of us. I mean, it's that kind of a... I mean, and that character, I guess, that character of Community in that show became an enhancement for all our lives. It changed our lives. So
How was being at the? I had a conversation with now who was it? Was John Boy from the Waltons.
Oh, really?
But he was doing To Kill a Mockingbird.
Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know he did it.
Sorkin's To Kill a Mockingbird.
Yeah, right,
And I was interviewing him about it, and I said, how was that Waltons theme? I just kind of brushed it off, and he said, Tom, you have to remember that before streaming, God loves streaming. He said like everybody was just watching. They were the numbers were unbelievable.
Huge,
and 90s sitcoms were not unlike that too.
That's true.
That Frasier, that Friends, that Seinfeld, these three shows. Can I just offer, in a sort of a broad way, what was that time like when Frasier was attracting those kind of numbers when the show had gotten that big for you?
It was the natural sort of result of a good show. At that time, that's where the audience was. That's how big the audience was. Yeah. It became more digitized, I guess, after that, and it became smaller, or less of a sample from different parts of the community. But they offered more junk, and the good stuff still sort of stuck. People still found the good stuff, and they're finding it again. It's now really, really spread out, and I think we'll try to bring it back to,
Well, why do you think the show connected? It has to be more than just the writing.
Well, a lot of people thought, at first they said, what is this show about, psychiatrists, and it's a little highfalutin and blah, blah, blah. I think it was really just about relationships. I mean, a character situation relationship defines all expression, basically. It's, do you have a relationship with them? Do you have a character? What's the situation? Those things drive drama or comedy. If you have really good writers and you have really good actors, they find the funny in it, and if they are extraordinary actors, and I think we arguably had that, they elevate it to a form of entertainment that people just don't expect, and I think it surprised people.
So you think it's sheer ability?
Yeah,
like sheer
will, ability, skill, and heart. Without the heart, it's nothing, and that's what William Faulkner said years before when he accepted the Nobel Prize for Literature. He just said, if you're not writing about the human heart, you're writing about nothing.
Are there any risks of rebooting it?
Sure, just the idea that, well, I hope they like it, but I mean, I was going to make sure that it was a good show.
I mean, I'm happy with the confidence, and it is great, man. I think there was a lot of people who were wondering how it was going to be, but it is great.
Well, they fell in love with what the old show was. Now they get to fall in love with the new one. They didn't know it before.
Yeah, and I guess when you have something that's so, I think what I'm asking is when you have something that's just the way you're talking about it is so dear to you.
Yeah, it is.
Personally, in terms of
life
is, your family.
And this character has given me a great life, and I've given him one. So it's kind of it's a great give and take.
How have you seen this character grow over the years?
Well, he's more in touch with who he is. He's more comfortable with who he is. He's wealthy now. That was a big thing for him, honestly, and I think it's probably a big thing for a lot of people. When you don't have to worry about money, you get to worry about the stuff that matters. Mm-hmm. And he finally made that happen. That's one monkey off his back, and it also brought him some fame, which he wanted, and some recognition, which he also wanted, because everybody was getting recognized around him, and he wasn't getting to taste the wine. Mm-hmm. And now he gets to focus on the things that really matter: his family, his love, his son, and hopefully, a relationship with someone special somewhere.
How have you grown alongside the character?
Well, we've sort of walked the same streets together for quite a while.
What do you mean?
Well, it's like he goes down the road, I say, hey, they're saying hey to me. It's like, it's Frasier, but it's also, what's really funny is in New York, people go, yo, Kramer.
Great, good.
What the hell?
Yeah, that's great.
I've figured out some bizarre context for it, where it's like, my name's Grammer, I play Frasier Crane.
He's on NBC.
Kramer was on a really famous sitcom.
Yeah, that'll do it.
So that's how I ended up being Kramer in New York.
I think what I'm curious about is not to dig into your personal life, but is to, like, when people are associated with one character for a very long time. Kelsey, I can't think of another actor who's been associated with a character this long.
Right. Well, Jackie Gleason maybe. But
maybe
pretty famous.
Honeymooners only ran for a few years.
Yeah, but he kept sort of reprising it. They did the Jackie Gleason show out of Miami and stuff, and the June Taylor dancers. And he had a long time relationship with America that was based on his personality, basically. But I've had some great success in a couple of other roles.
Oh, yeah.
That have been, so the audience was willing to embrace me as something else,
Mm-hmm.
which was always good. But they were always, I think, delighted to see Frasier's still relevant. He's still somebody they want to know more about. They want to see him fail and succeed and still want to succeed. Because he lives with such passion. He lives in a way that I think a lot of people would like to live, because it means a lot to him. And, rarely does a person have the nerve to say, we're going to make this work, and I'm taking you all with me. And that's what makes him really lovable.
It just seems like you really care about the character.
Yeah, I do.
Like you really love the character.
And I really care about life.
Yeah.
And, my kids, the people I'm close to, it just needs to be an extraordinary experience. We're meant to do what we're meant to do, and this is what I'm meant to do.
I think we get that from grief. Can I be honest with you? That's my thing.
Yeah.
What we get from grief, I talked to you, so here's a name drop. I talked to Bono about this one time. Oh. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
I could just walk out now.
Yeah, you could.
And I promise I will. Don't worry. But we talked about, he lost his mom at such a young age.
Yeah.
And of course this is nearly as tragic, but we just talked about how it does give you a greater appreciation
Absolutely.
for life around you.
Yeah, life is precious. Life is precious. You learn that early, and then you live hard. Sometimes you live a little too hard, make some mistakes you wouldn't have maybe made otherwise.
Yeah.
Need a little guidance, but you get back on track. There is God. There is an energy, a path that is reflected in our day-to-day, that if we hear the voice, it says don't give up. So we don't give up.
At this time where people can't seem to agree on anything, Frasier is one of those shows that seems to take in everybody. There's a lot of articles that were written about it being this comfort watch, that in the midst of instability, in the midst of people not being able to get along, Frasier is this comforting thing to watch. How do you respond to that?
Hopefully, because I believe power actually really enjoys confusing us about who we are. I think power thrives on it, and maybe that's, I don't want to go too Christian on people here, but the enemy thrives on us not knowing who we are. And when we do know who we are, when we know that we like Frasier, when we know we share more than we don't, to be reminded of that makes us powerful, and makes the powerful less powerful. So I'm gunning for them.
Last question. I don't want to leave without asking you about Sideshow Bob.
Oh, thank you.
Very important to me growing up. Very important to a lot of people listening to this growing up. The great character in The Simpsons. Can you talk a little? I don't know how that came up.
Sideshow Bob. I've told the story, but he is based. It's a direct ripoff of a person I knew.
I didn't know that.
Ellis Rabb, who was a very famous American actor, theatrical actor, and director. They did some amazing shows with a production company called APA, usually at the Lyceum Theater in Manhattan. And he was a breathtaking human being. He was married to Rosemary Harris for a while. In the generation when, they just thought they'd try things. Ellis was gay, and everybody knew he was gay. Even he knew he was gay, and Rosemary knew he was gay. But they were going to try to be together as a couple, and I think they did a pretty good job.
Okay.
But finally they got divorced, and Rosemary had a child with a fella, I think, who was in politics, actually. But at that time, I was painting his apartment and hanging wallpaper for him and doing chores and going over to they were going to reopen APA. I was going to the offices.
This is before Frasier. This is before Cheers. Before
Cheers.
Yeah.
So he would offer me a drink at the end of the afternoon. He'd say, Kelsey, would you like a drink? I'd say, sure. And so he actually said this one time. He said, "Oh, Kelsey, that baby should have been mine." I thought, I'm stealing this voice. I'm stealing this performance. And when Sideshow Bob came up,
how did that happen?
Sam Simon called. Sam Simon had been a writer on Cheers.
Yeah.
On the writing staff.
Oh, was he?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Cool.
And we were close. We were pals, and I really liked him. And he said, "We've got this character. We've just broken this story about Sideshow Bob, who's never spoken a word, is going to become this really erudite Cole Porter singing guy. Can you do that?" I said, "Of course I can." And he said, "Well, I thought so." So I went into this studio, and I looked at the character, and I thought, Ellis Rabb. There he is. And of course, it became, "Oh, Bart." You know, it's a wonderful thing. Somebody, you know, I told this story somewhere, and somebody posted an old video recording of Alice doing, I think Uncle Vanya, maybe he was doing Dr. Dorn in it, and that said, Kelsey Grammer says he based Sideshow Bob on this actor, Ellis Rabb, and then they played the recording of it, and he says, yeah, looks like he did. So.
What's interesting to me about that is you can't seem to do one episode of anything. You come on to Cheers to do 3 episodes,
a long life,
and you find a long life with that.
right.
You come on to Sideshow Bob for do a guest thing that ends up being one of the
very
most
funny.
enduring
Sideshow
characters.
Bob is an enduring character. I always say it casts a long shadow across the animated universe. He's a wonderful character to play.
Lovely to meet you.
Thank you.
Thank you for making the time.
Likewise.
Thanks so
Thanks,
much.
man.